Good evening, I'm Ces Oreña-Drilon.
I'm Pauline Verzosa.
And I'm Shawn Yao.
The big stories tonight. It's like one big chorus from law enforcement agencies. There never was an attack on the Senate last May 13. Their probe points to one thing, a possible ruse to allow Senator Bato de la Rosa to slip out and go into hiding again.
And the Solicitor General goes on President Marcos's defense. It is asking the Supreme Court to reject the petition asking the chief executive to undergo a drug test and make public his medical records.
And officials are asking the NGCP and other energy players to explain the rotating brownouts going on for days now. One agency is also not ruling out collusion over electricity rates.
Hindi gulatan to because the conspiracy theories were abounding, but they were duly informed. For the record, all evidence points that there was no attack on the Senate.
Kasi nga, it's a protocol kung if you are being attacked and you're under threat, evacuate mo na yung, lalo na yung mga senators. But you stayed until 12:30. Yung pinakahuling umalis, 2:30 a.m. Tumakas pa, di ba?
There was no attack in the Senate. This was the conclusion after a 6-day probe into the shooting incident at the upper chamber on May 13. In a briefing at the palace this afternoon, both the DILG and the PNP presented their findings. The big story tonight from mobile journalist Daniel Dayao.
Based on CCTV footage and evidence gathered by the PNP forensics team, there is no indication that the NBI planned and conducted an attack on the Senate building. The events clearly unfolded. In the afternoon of May 13, NBI agents arrived at the GSIS building, which was adjacent to the upper chamber. The NBI was called in to fortify the security of the structure, given happenings at the Senate 2 days before. On Monday, Senator Bato de la Rosa turned up after months of absence. The next day, there was a swarm of crowds around the complex as the lawmakers settled in, with his institution's protective custody assured.
None of the NBA agents had tactical gear with them. They were dressed as NBA agents, clearly identified, nakalagay, but none of them had tactical gear with them. They did not have a battering ram. They did not have provisions for shaped charges to breach any door.
Remulla said the GSIS maintenance had told their Senate counterparts that all doors connecting both buildings will be sealed off.
So, hindi gulatan to because the conspiracy theories were abounding, but they were duly informed. The GM found it better to secure the entrances going into GSIS because Senator Bato had called for a people power movement, and had there been anarchy in the building, the GSIS contains billions of pesos of worth of artworks that are displayed in their walls.
The Interior Secretary and PNP Chief Jose Melencio Nartates also presented CCTV based on the timeline of events leading up to the May 13 chaos at the Senate. At 5:23 p.m., Senator Bato went on Facebook Live and called on the public for support. De la Rosa claimed to have received word that the NBI were on their way to arrest him after the Supreme Court rejected his petition. The senator is asking the High Tribunal to block an ICC arrest warrant, which tagged him as a co-perpetrator in the Duterte drug war. Minutes after Bato's video, the Senate adjourned its session. And almost an hour after that, Senate Sergeant-at-Arms Mau Aplasca announced to media that someone will be arrested. He did not say who. At 7:05 p.m., the Senate was placed on lockdown. Incidentally, around that time, the articles of impeachment against Vice President Sara Duterte arrived from the House of Representatives. At 7:45 in the evening, the first gunshots inside the Senate rang out. CCTV footage showed General Aplasca assembling the Senate security personnel, giving orders to lock and load. Time, 7:44 p.m.
In his order, you could see the Marines were cocking their guns. So it was lock and load. After which he proceeded to the hallway leading to the doorway where the NBI were previously. General Aplasca did it in full view of the press. In full view of the press, he gave the order of the lock and load, and he asked them to follow. He allowed them to follow up to a certain point. In normal situations, if there is a perceived confrontation, you will clear the building of all personnel because of possible stray fire. However, he allowed them to follow.
Between 7:46 and 7:49 p.m., Aplaska can be seen firing first at NBI personnel. As shown in the CCTV, one NBI agent withdrew while being fired upon. As he did, he was seen discharging his firearm as well. Their officer in charge then instructed all agents not to engage as they retreated.
Pagkatapos ng 6 na araw na masusing pag-iimbestigasyon, paghagilap po ng lahat ng available videos, interviews, affidavits, ay marami po kaming conclusion na nakuha. For the record, all evidence points that there was no attack on the Senate.
On the outside, wala tayong makikitang bullet hole going inside the building. Okay, so and per our ballistics examination, those 44 fired cartridges came from four firearms. So meaning, meron tayong 4 na shooter.
In a separate press conference today, NBI Director Melvin Matibag clarified that his personnel were not in the Senate when gunshots were exchanged.
What was told to me by the senators, sa loob ng Senate, binabaril sila. And the ballistics ng bala, yung papasok, makikita niyo yung ballistics, papunta lahat sa GSIS yung tamaan ng bala, walang papunta sa Senado. They were never put in danger.
Matibag also found it odd that there was no order to evacuate the Senate if it was indeed attacked on May 13.
Kasi nga, it's a protocol kung if you are being attacked and you're under threat, sa bahay mo limbawa, Ma'am Ichi, first thing that you did, evacuate mo na yung, lalo na yung mga senators. Kasi importanteng mga tao yan. Diba? So there is a danger. But you stayed until 12:30. Yung pinakahuling umalis, 2:30 a.m. eh. Tumakas pa, di ba?
Matibag, of course, was referring to Senator De La Rosa. The NBI says the hunt continues for the former Duterte PNP chief, who they now consider a fugitive from justice. And according to Matibag, they already have leads on where Bato is hiding.
Ang dami pong lead na binigay. But we have a lead kung nasaan talaga. Pero in the meantime, we will suspend yung announcement kung nasaan talaga siya. But again, sinabi ko naman yun, if there's somebody who is person that should be asked, unang dapat tanongin si Senator Robin Padilla dahil siya yung huling kasama.
Kapatid Mobile Journal, Daniel Dayaw, we are One News.
Now, will charges be filed for the Senate shooting incident? Let's discuss this and more with Justice Department spokesperson Attorney Polo Martinez. Good evening and welcome to the Big Story, Attorney.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
All right. It took 6 days for the DILG and the PNP to complete its investigation. How long will your task force take to look into who should be accountable for what happened in the Senate?
So there's no definite timeline yet because what makes us different, what makes our investigation different from that of the one conducted by DILG is you have to make sure that if you are going to be charging crimes or if the Department of Justice is going to be charging anything against any of these individuals, then they have to meet the facts have to meet the elements prescribed under the law. So it's a more rigorous and thorough process, and what I would say the investigation that was done by all other agencies. No, so no definite timeline yet, but of course, given the urgency of the situation, we would be issuing these findings very soon.
Now, obstruction of justice is one of the charges being talked about, and this involves disqualification of ever holding public office again if the person charged holds a position in the government. Is that correct? An elective position.
That is one of the accessory penalties, I believe. I would have to check the law again, the revised penal code. But yes, normally for grave crimes such as obstruction to justice and others, absolute disqualification is an accessory penalty to imprisonment.
Now, will your task force have to summon those people involved, for instance, Senate President Alan Peter Cayetano?
Well, so as part of our investigation, this department does have subpoena powers. One of the powers of our prosecutors. As to whether or not they will be issuing subpoenas against specific senators exactly, I cannot say for sure yet because that's up to the panel, no? I do note that Secretary Vida, Secretary Frederick Vida, did issue a directive to all law enforcement agencies, NBI, PNP, the Pasay City Police District, and even the NCRPO to submit whatever evidence that they have at their disposal no later than tomorrow, in fact, 5 p.m. tomorrow.
Now, well, Senator Bato de la Rosa is at large. And is there a case that, an additional case that can be, that he can be answerable for aside from the ICC warrant?
Well, that will depend entirely on what the findings of the prosecutors would be. Again, Ms. says, no, it has to, the facts, as soon as they're ascertained, have to be linked directly to a specific element under the law for these crimes. So that's how you determine whether or not a charge is warranted.
Now, let me rewind a bit because there was some sort of confusion between the position of the DILG and the DOJ pertaining to the ICC arrest warrant, which probably gave, you know, some of those in the Senate or some room, some doubt as to whether the warrant was enforceable or not. I hope the government will be, you know, clearer in this case. For instance, in the presentation in Malacanang today, there seemed to be agreement as to the findings that there was really no attack. But in the case of the ICC arrest warrant, what was the confusion there? How come two government agencies seem to contradict each other?
Okay, so I don't think there was any confusion on Ms. Sess, just to be clear. The law is very specific. The law says that under RA 9851, which is our own local domestic international humanitarian law, there are two modes by which an accused or a suspected person subject of a trial in a foreign tribunal, just want to make that clear, it's a foreign tribunal, international tribunal, is that there's surrender or extradition. We know that extradition in Senator Bato's case is not an available mode because there's no extradition treaty with the ICC, because it's not a state. You can only have treaties with state to state, no? It's not a state, it's an international court. The statute governing, it was the Rome Statute, which we know we are no longer a party to. However, surrender remains an option irrespective of any affiliation to any organization because that's domestic law. That's independent of any rules. So I think that one thing is clear, no?
But did the DILG know about this? It seemed its pronouncements prior to this so-called attack that was non-existent were different from the DOJ's clearer explanation of why the ICC warrant was valid and could be served on the senator.
I think Secretary Remulla had no confusion. It was he knows the law. Well, he was apprised of what the law does state. Surrender or extradition. I think if there's no contention at all with respect to that, no, Ms. Sess.
Now, before we continue with this investigation by the task force, the lawyers of Senator Bato point out the lack of IRR or how to implement 9851 is something that may benefit them. That there was the law is not clear on how this warrant should be delivered or served on the senator, and so they can challenge RA 9851.
Okay, so before I do proceed to give the DOJ stance on this, at least then it's a very new one. I don't know, it's issue. So I think before at the outset, I'd just like to reiterate that all these issues are currently pending with the Supreme Court by virtue of the petitions for certiorari and the TRO applied for by Senator Bato. So just not to violate the sub judice rule, which means that let's not delve too much or discuss publicly at least the matters pending before
But so
the
they
Supreme.
have a point to challenge 9851.
What I would say is that each party and each one of their councils would always advocate for their own position. So, and the law always, of course, is, of course, and when you go to trial, there's always going to be one position over the other. That's why you pit them against each other. And so, with the, with the wealth and breadth of legal knowledge, I think, submitted by both camps, the Supreme Court would be the final arbiter, not to really give a decisive and definitive ruling on this regard.
But if Senator Bato is found and the NBI says they have a clue to his whereabouts, can the warrant be served? Can he be arrested?
Yes, sir. So the executive branch's position has always been that the warrant by the ICC is valid. I think that one thing is clear, no? It's valid because the state has the right as a sovereign state, so by virtue of its sovereignty, to acknowledge the validity of this warrant. That's notwithstanding any affiliation or any membership to any treaty.
So is he correctly is it correct to say that he is a fugitive of the law?
I think that the term fugitive is a very technical legal term. So until such time that the Supreme Court or any court for that matter does say that categorically he is one, let's just wait for that. No, we're not in a position to say so. What we could say, however, is that again, the ICC warrant is valid, issued by the International Criminal Court. So yeah, that one thing is clear by virtue of residual jurisdiction. Okay, because all these incidents being investigated, they were done at the time that the Philippines was still a state party to the Rome Statute.
Correct. But Attorney Polo, no, to add to us queries about this, it's kind of confusing because when you look at the events on March 11, 2025, when they took the former President Duterte to The Hague, it was an attached agency of the DOJ, which was the PCTC, that did it via Interpol diffusion notice. So now it looks like it was, as the events unfolded last week, it was the NBI who served it. Was there any clear distinction or coordination between your agencies to ascertain, okay, who's going to serve it via what? Are we using the ICC warrant, or are we going to wait for the Interpol diffusion notice, which, if you go by Secretary John Vic Remulla's statements, yun yung hinahantay niya?
Okay. Now, legally, again, just to be clear, these are all pending matters with the Supreme Court. So the final arbiter, that being the Supreme Court, would be in the best position to say what really should have been done. No, but in terms of coordination, of course, the DOJ with the NBI as its attached agency coordinated with each other for all the events that transpired. PCTC is the designated government agency to receive or coordinate with the ICC. With Interpol too, yes, because it's the Philippine Center on Transnational Crime. So no question about that. But as to who enforces the warrant, no, Shawn, is that your question? Am I correct?
Correct.
As to
Also
who
that.
enforces it?
Who has
Parang
the
naiba
domestic...
kasi, parang attorney, na iba kasi dun sa pag-aresto sa dating presidente at yung pagtangkang arestuhin si Senator Bato. Why didn't we use the same procedure?
Okay, so lahat naman kasi to law enforcement. Okay, they all form part of the the enforcement cluster of the government. So any one of these agencies could in fact enforce the warrant. Primarily actually police, PNP, right? But NBI, PCTs, they all fall under law enforcement. So NBI specifically
And I'd like
too.
to ask, was there really an attempt to arrest the senator when he was when he was running in the staircase? Was the warrant, the NBI being an agency under the DOJ, was a warrant of arrest being presented to him and he fled and went to the Senate? What were the events on that day?
So that's a fact, Ms. Sesto, that's yet to be determined by the fact-finding panel by the DOJ. So they would be in the best position to know what happened. And again, law enforcement agencies are given a directive to submit all their evidence at their on hand to the DOJ by 5 p.m. tomorrow.
So you cannot
Yes,
tell us for certain now if
Not
that
yet,
indeed
not-
took place. Supposedly, there were two female agents of the NBI who tried to hand it to him, but he walked away and fled.
Ang sabi
That
ni
will-
Matibag, hinawi niya silang dalawa and he fled. And
Yun
then
nga po
nakita
yung-
na natin yung CCTV of what happened after.
Yun nga po yung sabi, no? Lots of different versions of the story. But so we would like to defer to the panel for that. Nabibigyan din naman po tayo ng sagot.
Kasi
Event-
I'm asking because sinasabi ng side ni Senator Bato, his legal counsels, na wala namang pinapakitang warrant sa kanya. So there was really no attempt to serve it on him.
Actually, what was shown on that day was just a copy of the ICC arrest warrant that former Senator Antonio Trillanes had. But we don't know if the NBI was actually holding a valid arrest warrant that would be served against Senator Bato.
So these are precisely the issues that the panel will figure out. No? The facts that we have to determine. We'll find out soon.
Kasama po doon si former Senator Trillanes because people are also asking bakit siya yung andoon and appeared to, at least to the public, siya yung unang nagpakita ng warrant.
And why the NBI allowed him to be there if he does not hold any position in government actually or as a law enforcement agent. Could the DOJ, could the NBI have erred in that regard?
I think, Ms. Cess, the fact that the NBI allowed Senator Trillanes, that's a conclusion of fact we have yet to determine too. And marami kasing sides ang sinasabi, anyone could see anything. But we'll figure out the truth, which of these facts being stated is the truth. We'll ferret that out soon enough.
Sana, Attorney Polo, may malinaw na timeline. You know, this is where, when the facts are unclear, this is where all the propaganda can come in. Eh. And so we just want to be crystal clear also about what really happened. Because if we cannot really dispute what one side is trying to put out as propaganda, we want the facts.
And I guess, Attorney, help us understand the process. Wouldn't the NBI need to seek coordination with the DOJ before supposedly serving and forcing an arrest warrant?
There was coordination. I think that one thing is clear. There was coordination.
On that day, Attorney, Monday?
Yes, there was. As to the specifics or the details of that coordination, even I would not be privy to that, no? But that is clear. There was coordination.
There was coordination to serve an arrest warrant for Senator Bato because there were rumors na siya nga po ay may planong umattend ng Senate session on that day. Tama po ba?
No. I think even yung pag-serve, ano ba yung purpose, di ba? Yun ang tanong eh.
Yes.
We know there's coordination. What was the purpose of that coordination between the NBI and DOJ? Was it to serve the warrant? I can't give a categorical answer to that yet because the coordination naganap is that NBI will be proceeding to the Senate. As to the specifics of the details, again, we'll have to wait. Okay, well, we will issue a pronouncement on this soon enough.
So yung prinesenta kanina na nasa press ko ni Secretary John Vic kasama ni PNP Chief Nartates, iimbestigahan nyo rin yung version nila nung timeline plus yung mga
Yes.
CCTV na pinakita nila sa atin.
Tama.
So
Titingnan
even
natin.
that is subject to a rigorous review, verification, right.
Independent po kasi. As much as we respect, di ba, the DALG and their own investigation, the conduct of which, independent na po yan sa DOJ dahil iba rin po yung purpose ng pag-investigate ng DOJ. It's to determine if criminal charges are warranted and against whom may charge.
So kasama na rin dyan ang head ng NBI because there are claims that he may also have committed some infractions. Claims by the camp of the Dutertes.
Ang imbestigahan po natin is yung situation, yung nangyari mga incidents from May 11 to May 14. Any person, kahit sino po yan, if may warranted na criminal charges, then we will recommend the filing of the same.
And attorney, the DOJ says it now has leads and quote-unquote actionable information on the whereabouts of Senator Bato de la Rosa, but there is still no formal manhunt order against the senator. So with that said, attorney, what specific steps is the DOJ taking to monitor the whereabouts of Senator de la Rosa?
Just to echo Secretary Vida on his statement, the directive is to stand down for now in issuing the warrant, enforcing it rather. So, yun muna. With the only exception of him when he does leave the country, kung nagtangka siya umalis ng bansa. Diba? Pag nagtangka siya umalis ng bansa, there's an ILBO and Immigration Lookout Bulletin Order na na-release namin through the Bureau of Immigration. And if makita na sinusubukan niya umalis sa bansa, then he will be arrested.
This stand-down order is in recognition of the pendency of the petition by Senator De La Rosa before the SC. Is that correct?
Yes. In deference to the courts. Diba? Respeto na po yan sa judicial process ng husgado.
But again, to be clear, the ICC warrant is completely enforceable because there's no TRO issued by the court.
Yes. Okay,
And to clarify lang, ILBO or HDO? Spokes. Yeah.
ILBO po, iba po yan kasi ang HDO, we know na korte lang po.
Pakilinawin lang ano yung
Immigration Lookout Bulletin Order.
So, ang Immigration Lookout Bulletin Order po, para lang klaro, it's executive in nature, meaning it's issued by the DOJ, of course, through the Bureau of Immigration as an attached agency. So, executive po yan. And what is the function of that? Ang function niya is to oversight. Okay, oversight. No, may pangalan nakalista doon. And if that person listed or indicated in that order is found to be attempting to abscond, leave the country, then the proper government agencies will be notified, primarily the DOJ. As to what steps will be taken after being notified, nasa executive discretion din po yan. And Secretary Vida has reiterated that in our case, in this particular case, if Senator Bato does do so, then it will be considered as a mockery of our judicial system of justice. Whereas, ang HDO, judicial naman, di ba? Iba naman.
Hindi, kinaklarify ko lang kasi sinabi mo pagka nakita siya sa immigration checkpoints, maa-aresto siya. So there is an executive order attached to his elbow na pag nakita siya, arestuhin siya? Or kasi normally pag lookout bulletin, titimbrehan lang na umalis eh.
Yeah, ito po yun. So, tama, correct, Shawn, no? Kasi ang HDO, yun lang yung korte lang pwedeng magpaano talaga aresto, di ba? Ang elbow, in itself, generally, wala yung power to, it doesn't,
you don't have the power to hold
the power
the
to
person,
hold
to prevent him.
Yes, to prevent his right to travel, di ba? Makakalawas pa rin siya ng bansa. But ang pinagkaiba in this situation is that may ICC warrant na valid.
Kung lumabas na ng bansa, paano po yun?
Kung lumabas po siya ng bansa at hindi kami natimbrehan, ibig sabihin, sa ibang paraan po siya nakaluwas. Diba?
Oo
In
nga
that
po,
case,
pero
then that's a different case.
the warrant is still enforceable in another country, or what are the laws that govern that?
Can't really say because if he does move to a different country, it will depend on that country's own laws, that own country's executive discretion. Diba? So, ang alam po natin is that in the Philippines, as a sovereign state, we have our own executive discretion, and the Philippines has considered the warrant to be valid. That I think is clear, that you don't need to be a party to any treaty to consider the same as valid. That's executive discretion, Pangilinan versus Cayetano. It's a Supreme Court decision.
We thank you for talking to us, DOJ spokesperson, Attorney Polo Martinez.
And we are not straying far from the Senate. Tension there remains high as speculation of another leadership coup lingers. Senator Rodante Marcoleta warned that anyone who would leave the current 13-member majority bloc would be worse than Judas. Judas, of course, was the apostle who betrayed Jesus. According to Marcoleta, Senator Bato de la Rosa risked his safety in order to attend the Senate session and deliver the crucial 13th vote for Cayetano during last week's leadership battle. Marcoleta urged members of the majority not to disregard De La Rosa's sacrifices by switching allegiance.
Kaya mas masahol pa kay Judas, yung maghuhudas sa amin.
So nakonsensya si Senator Mix kaya
Huwag na kayo magbanggit ng kung sino. Sinabi ko lang yun sa grupo namin. Hindi namin kagrupo si Senator Mix.
Reports earlier surfaced that several senators behind SP Cayetano are allegedly being persuaded to jump ship. The Senate majority holds a slim 13-11 advantage over the minority bloc right after Senators Mig Zubiri and JV Ejercito joined the group. The two previously identified as independents, even abstaining from the May 11 vote that ousted then Senate President Tito Sotto. And for the Senate coup to succeed, at least 4 senators need to switch sides. Sources claim there are 4 Senate members who are willing to do so, provided that Senator Cheese Escudero returns as SP. However, some members of the current minority bloc rejected the idea. Minority Senator Raffy Tulfo has denied they are moving to unseat Cayetano.
Oh, maganda naman. Dito po, maayos kami, solid kami.
allegedly merong pananakot daw po.
Pananakot?
Pananakot daw po para sumama sa inyo, sa side
Ay,
ninyo yung mga.
hindi namin gagawa yun. At never, ni isa sa amin, hindi gumawa ng ganon. We will not do that. Why would we?
This is a big story on One News, and coming up, one report shows the Philippines losing billions of pesos in revenue due to illicit tobacco and vape trade. We have details next. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the big story. The House prosecution panel is confident it has enough evidence to support all 4 articles of impeachment against Vice President Sara Duterte. Prosecutors are stepping up preparations for the upcoming trial. Leading the team is House Justice Committee Chair Jervil Luistro, alongside prosecutors that include Representatives Joel Chua, Lawrence Defensor, Chel Diokno, Laila De Lima, and Terry Ridon. The panel has also designated a lead prosecutor for each impeachment article covering allegations against Duterte of confidential funds misuse, unexplained wealth, bribery, and threats against the First Family. While the panel refused to disclose its full legal strategy, it maintained that documentary evidence and witness testimony are ready for presentation before the impeachment court.
We're very confident with the evidence that we have. We have been prepared with this since last year, and we are certain that once the evidence is presented in the Senate impeachment court, we can secure a conviction even for this article alone.
Given the entirety of the body of evidence that we had seen, tingin ko naman po, on unexplained wealth pa lang po, we can secure a conviction of the Vice President.
Meanwhile, panel member Isabel Zamora said lawmakers are not worried their role in the impeachment case could affect their chances in the next elections.
Hindi po kami nababahala. We are fulfilling our constitutional duty as House prosecutors, as congressmen, as representatives of our constituents. And lahat po kami ay nandito para lang ipakita ang ebidensya laban sa Vice Presidente na nakita naming may pagkakasala. Kaya nga po, naglabas po tayo ng articles of impeachment. Hindi po kami natatakot sa susunod na eleksyon.
Now let's discuss this with Congresswoman Jervil Luistro, head of the House prosecution team for the Duterte trial. Welcome back to the big story.
Good evening, Ces, and thank you for having me here again in the big story.
All right, this is the second attempt So what lessons have you learned from last year and hope to be able to see this through this time?
Well, it is apparent with what happened in the first impeachment. The entire Justice Committee was very conservative, was very cautious, was very careful. And that is the very reason why we were able to reach this far. Although we know for a fact na malayo pa ang aming tatahakin before we reach the finish line of this impeachment proceeding.
Okay. So the Senate has convened, mukhang matutuloy na. Bang hitches ang dapat ninyong abangan para baka maudlot ang
Well,
proseso?
that is the reason, says, why during the press con, I appealed to the sovereign Filipino people that by forthwith, the Constitution is not mandating only the convening of the impeachment court. By forthwith, what the Constitution mandates is the entire trial. Trial forthwith. So while we are very positive and we commend the impeachment court, the senator judges for responding immediately to the call to convene the impeachment court, we are also hopeful that after the receipt of all the responsive pleadings, the answer as well as the reply, we will immediately receive notice as to when we will be holding the pre-trial as well as the trial, which will lead to the decision of either conviction or acquittal.
Congresswoman, in your opinion, what would be a fair timeline for starting? Meaning, obviously, we can't naman expect it to start it tomorrow. But you said there's also that period of replies back and forth.
Correct.
Yeah, loosely lang po, ano yung ballpark timeline ninyo?
Well, since the period for filing an answer is 10 days, and the period for filing a reply is 5 days, plus we will be having a pre-trial where there will be marking of exhibits, submission of names of witnesses, as well as stipulation of facts. Perhaps the presentation of evidence by the prosecution followed by the defense will be happening by middle of July already.
Okay.
And Congresswoman, in the recent weeks, we asked a lot of lawmakers on what they believe is the strongest article of impeachment. Some have said it is the allegation on the unexplained wealth, yung salin. Some have said also it's the grave threats of the Vice President. So when it comes to your strategy, will you be focusing more on the articles that would most likely secure a conviction, or will you be giving equal weight to all articles of impeachment?
As far as we are concerned, the 4 articles are supported by strong evidence. So all of them, and as far as we are concerned, are strong articles of impeachment, which can result to the conviction of the Vice President. But of course, there are factors to be considered as to which article we should be presenting first, the next, until we finish all the 4 articles. No, that concern is still being debated on, discussed, and deliberated upon by the House panel of prosecutors. No, but certainly our submission to your question is all of them have strong evidence that supports them, and therefore we are very much positive, as you have heard from the members of the panel of prosecutors, the lead prosecutor of each article, all of them are confident that the evidence are sufficient to sustain the conviction of the Vice President.
Congresswoman, we see where the political lines are drawn at the Senate. But contingent to that is also the public, how they perceive you are presenting the case. And in this way, it is really where some are saying that the real audience are the voters. So how do you intend to communicate to the ordinary Filipino the importance of what you are doing?
Well, that is the challenge, says. We need to present the evidence in a way that we will be understood by the viewing public, the ordinary Filipino people. And you are correct with what you said, that in trying to convince the senator judges, we need to convince first the viewing public, the sovereign Filipino people. As a matter of fact, it is the public sentiments which at times employs pressure, if not reason, to the senator judges to vote in favor of conviction. No?
Just as
But
a metaphor, if I may point out, Congresswoman, the DILG and the PNP just today, after 6 days, said walang attack. Pero ito, alam na ng publiko, maaga pa lang. I mean, they already made their judgment, actually. Just to draw a similarity.
It is because, Ces, it's very easy to access what is really happening, not only through the mainstream, but also through social media, no? And without commenting to what happened in the Senate, I think the Filipinos are aware enough and conscious enough to judge on what is really happening. So what happened to the Senate, how the people were able to reach their own conclusion way ahead of the conclusion of the DILG, no? I think that will happen also in the impeachment proceeding, in the impeachment trial, that even before the decision of the senator judges, you can already feel, see, and hear the public sentiment or position as we continue to present the evidence for the prosecution.
So
and that is why, says, I wish to add, no, the evidence is actually very, very important, because when the evidence is strong, you will have the public sentiment in your favor. And if the public sentiment is with you, I think that is reasonable basis to say that the senator judges will possibly be deciding in favor of the conviction.
Kong, when will you be announcing your private prosecutors? Everyone is waiting.
Yeah, we are very much intending and willing to announce the list of our private prosecutors. However, what's challenging us is sobrang dami ang nagvo-volunteer na private prosecutors to help us. This is on a voluntary basis, no? And we are finding it hard to finalize, really, the list of our private prosecutors, although admittedly some of them are already working, although not on a regular basis with the public prosecutors, but soon enough, we will be announcing the list of private prosecutors.
That's a positive sign for you na
Lots of volunteers.
yeah, lots of volunteers.
That's correct. Napakarami ng gustong tumulong. Iba pa nga yung nagte-text sa akin, yung nagte-text sa ibang members ng prosecution panel, and even to the leadership of the House. Meron ding mga nagsasabi. All of them are offering help, no? And yes, you are correct, Ces. That's a very positive sign. It means that they believe in the cause of the House of Representatives.
Well, we thank you for your time. Representative Jervil Luistro, head of the House prosecution team in the Duterte impeachment trial.
And now in other news, the Office of the Solicitor General has requested the Supreme Court to junk a petition compelling President Bongbong Marcos to undergo a hair follicle test and publicize his medical records. According to the OSG, the petition utterly lacks merit. The Solgen also requested respondents, President Marcos and Acting Executive Secretary Ralph Recto, to be accorded just and equitable relief. The petition for mandamus at the SC was filed by former Congressman Pantaleon Alvarez and 3 other private citizens. They want to know if Mr. Marcos is physically and medically fit to discharge of his duties as president through medical exams. But the OSG insisted that the petition violates a doctrine of presidential immunity. In addition, it said the petitioners should provide personal and concrete proof of damage caused by the president's alleged ill health. The High Tribunal will now deliberate en banc to decide whether to dismiss the petition based on the OSG's arguments. That, or it can ask the petitioners to file a reply, or the SC can set the case for oral arguments.
Meantime, a new report highlights rising illicit vape and tobacco trade in Southeast Asia, driving major revenue losses for legitimate markets here in the Philippines. Mobile journalist Jazz Paredes with that story.
Talks of a total vape ban in the country have resurfaced in recent weeks. Then, another tobacco-related issue continues to deepen. Over the past 2 years, the country has lost an estimated 141 billion pesos in government revenue due to the illicit tobacco trade. A key finding in a report released on May 19 by the EU-ASEAN Business Council and Euromonitor International. The report also shows that more than 4 in 5 e-vapes, or 86% sold in the Philippines, are illicit, the highest among assessed ASEAN countries where vapes are legal.
The revenue loss is quite significant within each of the markets, and it's one of the key things that kind of supports that illicit industry. And this is something that multiple prong aspects needs to be taken in order to support and kind of reduce that impact to each of the individual markets.
Meanwhile, Indonesia recorded the highest government revenue loss among the ASEAN 6 at $5.6 billion, followed by Malaysia and the Philippines. Illicit operations are also found to be rising year on year, depriving governments of much-needed tax revenue, while the growth of illicit cigarettes may decline over the next 3 years. Illicit e-vapes are projected to grow faster with an annual increase of 8.5%, posing greater health risks to consumers.
Still going to be more e-vapes driven. We are seeing some higher consumption patterns in terms of trending.
You're not controlling what's inside the vapes. You're losing revenue, of course. But if you're running an illicit vape business, you care less about what's inside it. All you're caring about is making the money.
Findings also show that most illicit cigarettes produced in Southeast Asia come from Cambodia and Indonesia, with additional supply coming from China. Meanwhile, illicit e-vapes are mostly imported from China and disguised as retail goods for e-commerce. Hotspots for illegal smuggling include ports within free trade zones or FTZs, such as Port Klang in Malaysia, Lim Chabang Port in Thailand, Sabang Batam in Indonesia, and the Subic Bay Freeport Zone in the Philippines. However, talks for coordination with the Philippine government are now underway.
So far, certainly we've been working with customs authorities across the region. They recognise the problem. They recognise the problem that they're facing in enforcement, and they want to work with the private sector to try and tackle the issue. You've got to remember that customs are only part of the problem, and often they are under-resourced.
So I think we've discussed matters around regulation, enforcement, understanding, education. All of this plays a part into that illicit environment, and not just because of taxation.
Kapatid Jazz Paredes, we are One News.
Now, this is still the big story on One News. When we return, the Energy Department will The Big Story is back with the People for Power Coalition predicting power prices going up some more. That's despite ongoing rotational brownouts caused by thin power supply. News 5's Gerard de la Peña has this report.
Just last week, there was no consoling Lucy after experiencing a brownout that lasted for 3 excruciating hours.
Tulad po sa akin na may asthma po, talagang mahirap kasi sa sobrang init, hindi po ako makatulog. Naligo na po ako. Tapos nasa labas lang po talaga kami dyan sa may terrace nakatambay. Mas matindi pa nga po sa bagong taon kasi lahat ng tao naglabasan.
At the time, the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, or NGCP, declared red alert over parts of Luzon, including Metro Manila, meaning power supply was thin and rotating brownouts were inevitable. Just like her, many have taken to social media to complain about the current power situation and how their electricity bills kept on piling up and becoming more expensive despite the outages. According to Power for People Coalition, prices at the wholesale electricity spot market, or WESM, doubled from May 13 to 15. or just when two major lines of NGCP failed and caused power supply in Luzon and Visayas to drop. Since power utilities probably bought their supply from the WESM around that period, the coalition expects costs to be passed on to consumers maybe until June.
Nakakalungkot dito, sa dulo ng lahat, once mag-procure ang electric cooperatives at ang distribution utilities sa spot market, automatic pass on yan. Ang may kasalanan dyan, NGCP at yung mga nag-unforced shutdowns ng mga planta.
According to the Energy Regulatory Commission, it is taking note of the NGCP's explanation about grid supply problems last week. The ERC also wants power plant operators to explain why they implemented and scheduled maintenance shutdowns. Such activities are prohibited during hot, dry months, even amid high demand for electricity. At this point, the Commission is not ruling out possible collusion among power generation companies.
Tinitingnan natin kung merong mga badges or mga pahiwating na mayroong anti-competitive behavior na nangyayari na ang isang planta ay naka-outage at hindi nga siya makapagbenta ng kanyang kuryente. Pero meron namang ibang kaalyado niya o yung affiliate niya na nakakabenepisyo.
On Tuesday morning, May 19, Bayan protested in front of Meralco's office. Their call to remove the 12% VAT on electricity and junk EPIRA, or the Electric Power Industry Reform Act. These are supposedly giving private electricity distributors and power generators a free hand to further increase prices. But Meralco begs to differ. It said all their charges undergo intense scrutiny and approval by the ERC. Meralco likewise said power supply agreements go through a competitive selection process or bidding to enable the company to secure the most affordable power supply for customers. For News 5, Gerard de la Peña, We Are One News.
Now, meanwhile, the Department of Agriculture is studying if it should impose a suggested retail price or SRP on local rice. According to Agriculture Secretary Francisco Laurel Jr., the DA has reached an agreement with industry stakeholders to set an SRP of 53 pesos per kilo for local rice. Laurel has consulted with stakeholders about the SRP and everyone agreed. President Bongbong Marcos ordered the price cap under Executive Order 118 to help consumers cope with the crisis brought about by the Gulf War.
Ang patong lang niya ng buong sistema is 10 pesos lang. So kung 38 ang landed, dapat 48 nga lang yan eh. So ginawa na natin 50 para kung meron tayo mga hidden costs. Wala naman tayo sinasabi hindi sila kikita eh. Wag lang sobra.
And before we go, copying and reproducing works of Filipino fashion designers have become increasingly rampant. An issue that's now sparking conversations across online platforms. But despite this challenge, Francis Libiran continues to put Filipino craftsmanship on the global stage through his world-class creations. News 5's MJ Marfori tells us more.
From Olympic athletes to P-pop kings, to winning beauty queens, and even local and foreign leaders. When it comes to world-class fashion, award-winning designer Francis Libiran has become a household name. And just last week, his creations became the talk of the town during the ASEAN events, worn by President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and First Lady Liza Araneta Marcos. Even Thailand's First Lady Thananon Charnvirakul turned heads in Libiran's modern yet elegant take on Filipino dressing.
It's the first time that they saw Madame in that orchid color that looks very vibrant on her. And plus, sabi niya, the simplicity of it matches her personality. So parang positive comments naman yung mga naririnig ko.
Just last April, Libiran also showcased these gowns in Harbin, China, as the only Filipino designer featured in the event. But despite opportunities like these, Libiran admits Filipino fashion designers continue to face a major challenge: the rampant copying and mass production of their original designs online.
When we did the SEA Games, happened nung nangyari dito. So, syempre tuwang-tuwa ako because it's all praises, everything's nice, it's something new. And then, it ended up in Shopee. So, during that time, pandemic yan eh, di ba? So, ang dami kong time. So, I was researching. Sabi ko, maka-order nga ng isa. So, nag-order nga ako ng isa. Kinompare ko talaga.
Ano nakita mo?
Sabi ko, it's different.
Naman.
The patterns is different. It's not the center, ganyan. So, sabi ko, next time talaga pahihirapan ko sila.
Still, Libiran says imitation is not enough reason for designers to stop creating, a message he also shares with younger designers now facing the same struggle.
For the younger generation is you really need to think carefully. You know, when you're designing, put your identity to it because that will make a big difference. Diba? Pwedeng kinuha mo yung inspiration pero ginawa mo to your identity. And that will make it very unique.
Because behind every stitch, embroidery, and design, Filipino designers are creating more than just fashion. They are building the identity of Filipino craftsmanship on the global stage. MJ Marfori, we are One News.
All right, and on that note, that's it for the big story.